Very good morning to all. On behalf of the Department of English, the Ethiraj College for Women, I thank you all for joining us today for the 5-day National Webinar Series on Postcolonial Relationships, Conflicts and Concerns. Let us begin today's program with a Tamil word.
நீராறும் கடலுடுத்த நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராறும் மதனமென திகழ்வரத கண்டனிதில் எக்கணமும் அதில் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறம் வியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே
I now welcome Ms. Ethiraj, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, to welcome the gathering. Good morning. On behalf of the Department of English, Postcolonial, I'm pleased to extend a hearty welcome to the 5-day national webinar on post-colonial literature context and concepts. It gives me joy to welcome the research professor, Dr. Fatima Ara, Assistant Professor of English, English and Content, Dr. Annie Purity, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, University College, Chennai, Dr. Rami Pide, Associate Secretary, English and Head, Department of English, Sri Pratika Institute of Higher Dr. Tushar Rani,
Good morning, madam. Your voice is not audible, madam.
Your voice is not audible சொல்றாங்க. மைக் ஆஃப்ல இருக்கு. Madam, your voice is not audible, madam. ஒருத்தர் சொல்றாரு.
Madam,
Good morning, ma'am. You are not audible, ma'am.
நான் உள்ளே வரலடா இப்பதான்.
meeting நடந்துச்சு audible இல்ல.
Postcolonial literatures includes a fascinatingly wide array of literary texts that come from varied parts of the world, such as India, West Indies, Africa, Australia, and Canada, just to name a few. It's a fairly dominant form of literature with a wide appeal. It deals with framing identities, the politics of rewriting, translations, relationship between nation and nationalism. Since the residue of Western colonialism continues to thrive in the guise of neo-colonialism, it becomes imperative to discuss the relevance of colonial ideologies so as to better understand the emerging texts from a neo-colonial perspective. And that would be the objective for this webinar series. Dr. Arjuman Ara, the speaker for today, is an assistant professor of ELT in the English and Foreign Languages University, Shillong campus. She was a visiting faculty at Oakton Community College, USA, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, NERAENCERT, Shillong campus. She has completed MPhil and PhD from CPhil, EFL University, Shillong campus. Her writings are published in India and abroad on literature, film, culture studies, and language pedagogy. She writes poetry and also translates them. A translation of Imtiaz Mahmood's Maxim is published from Bangladesh. Her upcoming publication includes an English translation of Imtiaz Mahmood's poetry collection, Kalo Katuk, an authored volume on critical pedagogy and English studies in India, and 3 edited volumes, Revisiting Partition, Visual Cultures of India, and Sarita Sutrakatha, Riverine Cultures in Indian Narratives. She has co-edited Indian Narrative Traditions and Narrative Cultures of Northeast India. She has produced course study materials for different academic institutions. She is also the recipient of Barka Khati Journalism Award for the year 2004. Over to you, Arjuman Ara ma'am.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Everyone.
We have to share it first. Just to share. Skip.
Yeah.
Skip. Ma'am, you can start now.
My,
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Namaskar from this corner of India, which is called Northeast India. Thank you so much, ma'am Yashoda and my student Ari, for making it happen for me to be a part of this noble endeavor that you are having a series of talks on a topic which is really close to us, the scholars, the students of English studies. And obviously, this is something that we have to continue to deal with. We cannot avoid post-colonial condition now at any cost. It's not possible only. So therefore, we have to keep revisiting, recontesting what is colonial and what is post-colonial in our literature. Now, Northeast India, as you are familiar with, you know, when you say Northeast India, you know it as a sort of geographical location. What it hides is the cultural identity. Now, this is a place which is full of cultural diversity, and it is a place where there's a lot of languages and therefore a lot of cultures and a lot of narratives in that way. Therefore, it is problematic to construct a particular definition to identify people from Northeast or even literature from Northeast. So when I say Northeast India, we mean it as a sort of geographical entity, but here we are trying to sideline or marginalize the linguistic and ethnic identities. And even the geographical idea or identity also is problematic, that people may very often ask whose north or whose east it is. So in the global world, which is a round world, we are actually not north or east of anybody. Even these terms also to identify this geographical location also in that way is a colonial construct, you can say. Now, the decolonialist thinkers have looked at the map of the world from different angles, and from each angle, you can see that your location is your first world. Therefore, this concept of even third world or fourth world, they are problematic in the sense because everybody is everybody's own center. So I am using the word Northeast India or literature from Northeast India in the term which is politically or in the journalistic writing used to identify this geographical location. At the same time, giving you a caution that this is problematic. Now, to contest the post-colonial, first of all, we have to have a cursory glance at what is colonial. Now, the discourse of coloniality makes us see spaces as colonized spaces. Now, is this space only geographical? The answer is a clear no. Obviously, the colonialist forces have occupied the geographical spaces, but at the same time, the way the colonial forces have worked upon, we also got mentally conditioned. We got a different sort of subjective, colonialist subjectivity in terms of our consciousness. Therefore, when we talk about decolonizing the mind, we talk about how the mental space also can be decolonized and how the mind is colonized, which we need to deconstruct. Now, obviously, the colonial forces had the primary objective of imperialism in their mind. It is to spread the colonial power. And we have seen that the history of the humankind is full of such histories of colonization. Many communities, many countries have occupied, colonized land of many other communities, many other places. The way people kept on migrating, the way the history of migration also continues, has been continuing, we understand that imperialism also has been continuing accordingly. Now, the forces of imperialism always have a sort of hierarchy in it to show whose power, who is more powerful over other, who can occupy others. And obviously, one can look at Gramsci or Foucault to understand how they have defined hegemony of power. And the thing is that this hegemonic power structure has resulted in a long-lasting domination and exploitation of the colonialist subjects. This subjectivity, although it is political, it also become economic, and it also resulted in socio-cultural domination. And most importantly, it resulted in a sort of cultural, ideological domination. But the imperialist subject become more important than the human subject. When we talk about India, we mostly talk about British colonization. And the way we try to understand, we again resort to the Western thinkers like Derrida or Edward Said, who have defined colonial and post-colonial for us. Now, I would like to give a comment from Raman Sheldon's book, where he says that Jacques Derrida has described Western metaphysics as, quote, the white mythology which resembles and reflects the culture of the West. The white man takes from the Indo-European mythology his own logos, that is the mythos of this idiom, for the universal form of that he must still wish to call reason. So Edward Said also has talked in detail in his book Orientalism about how the ideological other, the Occident, was constructed by creating a sort of knowledge regarding the colonized other. Now, when we look at post-colonial, do we also mean it anti-colonial? From our glances, it appears that we do look at the post-colonial as anti-colonial to a great extent. But why do we do so? Now we see that with the post-colonial situation or even the pre-post-colonial situation, you can say that like in many countries, it is just before the independent period, we can see that a sort of new consciousness started coming in, pouring in, arising in people's mind, which gave a strong sense of nationalism, which led to independence. And it also led to a sort of rejection of whatever is colonial. In our Indian context, if you see immediately after independence, people had a colonial legacy that even Mahatma Gandhi ended up saying that of a linguistic slavery. So in that way, rejection of the colonial started taking place in the light of the new formation of identity. The colonized now gains a sort of agency and starts renegotiation of power relation with the colonial center. Now, post-colonialism helps us to contest those ideologies and the imperial objectives, which had which had taken a strong which had become strong forces of colonization. At the same time, many of the post-colonial thinkers also have started critiquing modernity in terms of critiquing capitalism. Now, this endeavor is read as post-structuralist endeavor, where there is a decenteredness in favor of a pluricenteredness, while the centrality of the white supremacy or Eurocentrism is deconstructed in favor of the pluricentered, uh, uh, the world, pluricentered world, which is all around, everywhere. Now, here what happens, we also look at aestheticizing or re-aestheticizing the post-colonial. So in the post-colonial situation, we come across some theoretical terms like parody, hybridity, revivalism, ethnocentrism, and similar other terms, which helps us to formulate certain tenets or postulates to look at post-colonial representation also. Now, the major influences, obviously, you are familiar with, I guess, like Said, Baba, Spivak, Bakhtin, Foucault, Marx, and so on. So I'll not deal with the theories here. I'll straight away come to post-colonial literature. Now, literature, we understand that it is coming from the root word is litera, which means something which is represented in letters. From there, literature has become a mode of representation and reproduction. Now, what does literature do? Literature represents us, ourselves, and our society, and in that way, it is a production of the society, and it also reproduces the society or social structures in the narratives. Now, in that way, when literature writes or talks about us, it creates a knowledge about us. Therefore, literature in that way is also a mode of knowledge production, or you can call it a sort of alternative knowledge production. But for us, literature is the mode of knowledge production because it talks about us. Now, the post-colonial literature can be read as a sort of de-universalizing narratives, where localizing or ethno-narratives also take a precedence or importance in this de-universalization process, where the white or the Western literature is seen as equal to the local literatures. Now, there are different ways of contrasting the status of Western rationality, uh, which we have seen in the thoughts of the thinkers I just mentioned. But literature also helps us in this contesting the strategies of Western rationality. So in that way, post-colonial literature is a rediscovery of our own self, and it is also a rewriting of our own self. Now the question is, do we need new aesthetic forms or norms to understand this kind of literature? The question can be a big yes, in the sense that theories of literary studies also keep on changing with the development of new kinds of writings. Therefore, when we have a new kind of writing in the post-colonial condition, why not new aesthetic forms? So this also necessitates a sort of alternative canonization, which we talk about almost all the time when we frame syllabus for our students nowadays. Now, what is the content of post-colonial literature? So I'd like to give a quotation from Erich Boehmer. He says that it includes the events and experiences from national bonding to international wanderings, from rootedness to peregrination. So therefore, whatever is there, whatever has constituted us, uh, can be a part of post-colonial literature. I find this comment particularly relevant in terms of what Eliot has talked about European literature. Although Eliot's view was bound to only European literature, but here in Erich Boehmer's comment, it is much more extended to all the colonial places, colonial writings, post-colonial writings. Now, what is happening when Eliot is saying that each new writing is a contribution to the eternal flow of art and literature in the West. So similarly, this new literature also can be seen as a contribution to the eternal flow of literature, what we call world literature, Commonwealth literature, or global literature. And many of the decolonialist thinkers are also in favor of looking at literature as part of world literature. literature only, because we are all part of the same world. But that, let me keep that argument a little bit aside for time being. Now let me come to the second quotation of Bill Ashcroft et al., who said that we use the term postcolonial, however, to cover all the cultures affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present day. It is more appropriate as the term for the new cross-cultural criticism which emerged in recent years and for the discourse through which this is constituted. Now, this also includes the effect of this on contemporary literature. Therefore, post-colonial literatures developed through several stages, which can be seen to correspond to stages both of national and regional consciousness and of the project of asserting difference from the imperial center. Therefore, post-colonial writing can be seen as a sort of rewriting or writing back to the center. Now, further referring to Rushdie's imaginary homelands, Boehmer also described post-colonial literature as polycultural, translated writing, oppositional, anti-authoritarian, and having a quality of plurality. So the post-colonial colonial literature can be noisy, or you can use the term of Bakhtin, that is polyphony. It is authentic in terms of the textual strategies. And we can, in that way, look at each of the post-colonial literature having their own individuality, idiosyncrasy, and uniqueness. Now, what is happening to colonial Northeast? Now, Northeast India, like the other parts of India, was under the rule of the British colony. In fact, Northeast India was outside the pre-British territory of India. If you look at the map, that Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha, it was one state, and most of the part of Northeast was out of that geographical territory. Now, what happened here? Northeast India got access to Christianity, or Christian missionaries started promoting Christianity a lot here, and you will see that a state like Mizoram and Nagaland, there are most of the people are converted to Christianity only. Along with that, we also got modern education, which came through the colonizers. Along with the colonizers, please don't forget that tea garden laborers who are known as Girmitia or Adsis. Many Chinese people also have migrated to this part, and similar other things also had been happening. So in modern days, it is creating many identity politics also because of that, because of the colonial migration. So it created a lot of socio-cultural changes, and people looked at British education or colonial education or missionary education as an alternative to traditional knowledge system, and many people got converted to have an access to that. Now writing started. So you'll see that many of the communities here, they have strong oral culture, and they didn't have anything called writing or scripting. So writing started, and translation also started. In many communities here, the first printed book is the translated version of the Bible. So Bible is the first printed text in those languages, you can say. And printing press also started. So newspapers like Arunodaya started getting printed, which gave access to more of the colonial knowledge. Now, English in that way started gaining prominence in this region, and it became a prominent language of writing. Not only now, it also was a prominent language of writing in the colonial period. Now, this is very interesting. Notice that although many of the writers are polyglots, most of the writers have chosen to write in English, and the reason may be to have wider access of audience. Now, English is the state language of Nagaland and Meghalaya, and adopting English as a language for writing can be called a literary decolonization in colonial language. Now, here what happens, English is accepted as a gift of of the colonizers. You will find that many of the Christian tribal writers, they appreciate the missionaries for bringing in English and Christianity. They claim that they are being saved, quote and unquote. So in that way, you will see that English is accepted as a gift, and many people are not in favor of changing English in favor of any of the local languages. So in that way, the English which is used here can be read as a part of Englishes, as Ashcroft and others have pointed out. So this itself is a new idiom where you have so-called Indianness of Indian English, and at the same time, this also has a globalness of Indian English. Now, as I said that many writers are polyglots, but uh, the way they have started using English language, you can say that this is a sort of decolonialist endeavor, which is also a result of a sort of cultural reawakening. Now, this book, Dancing Art, which is edited by Professor Rabin Yangam and Kingham Singh Nonketri, who are professors in the Department of English in Northeastern Hill University in Shillong, they have given an interesting anecdote here that given the background, it was only natural that the majority of the tribes would take to the same kind of literature and influence which was exclusively Christian and English, in contrast to the Assamese, Manipuri and Bengali, who were exposed to Sanskrit and Hindi literature as well. Now, one thing I would like to point out here that although many of the communities had access to these languages, but their choice was English once again. So the literary legacy of the missionaries can be said to be double-edged. While on the one hand, they gifted the tribes with a common literary heritage, on the other, they made them deny the existence of their own literatures in their rich oral traditions and taught them to be ashamed of whatever is theirs as something pagan and preposterous. That is why the poetry of some of the hill tribes even today is seen to be either singing hymns or adorning cuckoos in the woods and non-existent daffodils in the vales. Modern poetry in this season is found in the free verse of Bengali, Assamese, Manipuri, and these tribal poets of the different states who write in their native languages and English. Now, this is a comment which is there in the introduction of their book, but I would like to say that even if they are writing in English, there is a post-colonial twist in their writing. And that is happening due to stylistic experimentation that these poets have done. And so obviously internalization of English, identification of English, linguistic assimilation and chutnification are a part of it. Now I'd like to say one experience of mine that once I spoke to some of the poets and I asked them that why do you write in English? And interestingly, many of them have said that they are proficient in English only because they studied in English medium missionary schools and they don't have the skill to write, I mean, for literary writing in their own mother tongue. So this is also, as I was telling you about the creation of mental conditioning, this is also one kind of conditioning of the creative consciousness which happened because of the presence of English, which is brought by the colonial forces. Now, Marjorie Parlov has pointed out six features here to mark the distinctiveness of American poetry, which are very prominent also in the writing of the Northeast writers, like avoidance of recurrent patterns of stress and syllable, dominant of image, regulated syntax based loosely on the spoken idiom, linear movement, relatively unobtrusive sound structure, and visual representation. Now, these features are also available in the writers of Northeast, and you will see that there's a lot of experimentation. Now, I have given an example from Professor Rabin Yangam. If you go to the next slide. So he has used totally a prose form to write poetry. And this you will see also in other poets like Desmond Carvoplang, Priatila Kikon, and some other writers as well. Now, these writers are trying to explore the creative possibilities of English for their self-expression. And I'm giving an example from Yamlam Tana's poems, The Kurta and the Pajama. If you go to the next slide, please. So here, Tana sees himself as a global citizen, and at the same time, he also projects himself as a post-colonial, culturally hybrid self. He writes, I am wearing the kurta and the pajama, which is not traditional like the pomo and jupung, or so acquainted with my mother cradled in these ethnic clothes. I write in English, which is not my language. You see, I am a Nishi. Nishi is a tribal community. A tribal claiming to be a man, I am all humanity with no geographical boundary, no social restriction, no biological limitations, nothing to divide me from my fellow men. I lay my claim on the Bible, the Quran, the Gita, and all human endeavors in science, arts, and commerce. The hearts of men will understand any dialect I use, Nishi, to speak. So I think you know why I write in English and wear the kurta and pajama. Now, this poem is very interesting to show that how even the hybridized consciousness about one's own identity can be a part of this self-expression, which you can see in the poems. Now, many writers, as I said, that although they are polyglots and they are still using the cultural tropes and the linguistic tropes in their English writing also. So I'm giving an example from Despon Karmoplang, who has translated the
இட்ஸ் வெரி பேசிக். அவங்க ஸ்லைடை படிச்சு முடிச்சாலே போதும். படிச்சு முடிச்சுட்டா ஸோ அவங்க பேசிட்டு இருக்காங்க.
So Despon Karmoplang has translated Khasi oral narratives into English, which is published by Sahitya Academy. And here he has used the cultural tropes and local imagery by directly bringing the Khasi, and at the same time also giving certain translations. Could you go to the next slide, please? So here is an example of how he has used the local terms, which gives a distinct flavor of, you can say, Khasi English. Now, as post-colonial writings, Northeast poetry heavily critiques coloniality, modernity, and Christianity. So I am giving an example from Temsula Au's poem Blood of the Other Days, where she says, then came a tribe of strangers into our monasteries, armed with a book, that is Bible, armed with a book and a cold heaven, declaring that our trees and there are stories, nothing but nonsense. We listen in confusion to the new stories, and too soon allowed our knowledge of other days to be trivialized into taboo. So here, the changes which are brought due to the colonial forces is very prominent, and she continues to say that we are stripped of all our basic certainties, we strayed from our old ways, and let our soul mountain recede into a tiny anthill, and we schooled our minds to become the ideal tabula rasa, on which the strange intruders began scripting new history. So we shifted, we stippled our natural articulations, turned away from our ancestral gods, and abandoned customary ritual beguiled by the voice of a new one. So this is how Temsula Au points out how Christianity and modernity made the changes in her society. Now, similarly, Kinfam Nongkri also writes one poem which is titled Only Strange Flowers Have Come to Bloom. Now, in Shillong, which is the capital of Meghalaya, the fruit pears grows a lot, but it is not a local fruit. It was brought by the colonizers. And in this season, actually, right now also it is blooming a lot. The pears flowers are blooming. And with this pine uh, pollens and this pears pollens, people are falling sick. They are sneezing many times, most of the times. So it is like seen to be a disease brought by or sort of discomfort brought by outsiders. So Nomkintri, he laments the loss of the previous life and says that like them, we shed our old ways, like them is the colonizers. And having shed them, we find no spring to bring the flowers back. Like flowers, only strangers and strange ways have come to bloom in this land. So therefore, there's a lamentation for the loss also. And you have seen that similar things are also happening in other cultures like things fall apart. Now, what is happening? A cultural revivalism or ethno-nationalism also is coming into the picture now. So the poets in that way are also called cultural historians because they are retelling the tales of the tribe and their past. Now, I have told you before also that orality is very important in the traditional cultures here. And I guess some of you might be familiar with the Whistling Village. The name of the village is Kongthong, and I think 2 3 months back it was in news because here what happens in the whole village there are around 150 houses and around 700 people. Each people has each people has a name, and the name is like I am calling myself Arjuman. There it is not a name. It is a tune, a musical tune, and there's a shorter version and also a smaller version, a short version and a longer version. So in that way, what is happening here? Sound is very important here, and people have to respect the word or the sound. So this old world, these new faiths are getting recreated, and people are re-looking at this. Now, this yearning to look back is prominent even in the title of the books that the writers of this region have written. Now, Temsula Al's book is titled Songs from the Other Life. Esther Sim's book is titled Oral Scripting. Nonkindri's book is titled The Earring of the Seeds. Karma Flang's book is titled Stone U Shamak Mo means stone. Mamang Dai's book is titled as Midsummer Survival Lyric and River Poems. Now, these names, these themes, the tones, they all are a sort of reassertion of identity in terms of what is local. And in that way, you can also see it as a sort of resistance to coloniality and colonial representation. Now, what is happening? I'm going to read one more poem from Temsula Au, where she tries to recreate the old world when she says that grandfather constantly warned that forgetting the stories would be catastrophic. We'd lose our history, territory, and most certainly our intrinsic identity. So I told stories as my racial responsibility to still in the young the art of perpetuating existential history and essential tradition to be passed on to the next generation. Now, this is where not only recreating the past is important, but continuation of the past also is important so that one does not lose their history or identity, intrinsic identity. Now, in another case of Mamang Dai also, she creates the folk elements in her poetry when she says that the history of our people begins with the place of stories, stories again related to orality. We do not know if the language we speak belongs to a written past. Nothing is certain. So the colonial narrative that these people are not civilized, they don't have that script. So it is a contestation of that nothing is certain. You don't know our past. We also don't know our past. So better not claim that it was there or it was not there. So Temsula also claims that storytelling becomes a proud legacy for her, which she has inherited from her grandfather, and it is a primary treasure. And therefore, I quote once again, when my time came, I told stories as though they ran in my blood, because each telling revitalized my life force and each story reinforced my racial reminiscence. So, in that way, racial identity also is brought into the foray, into the picture. And you can see that although they're writing in English, they're writing about their own self or own cultural past. So Malsomi Jacob is another poet. She writes, I quote from her poem, "We are rich in tales and legends stored in our collective conscious, but have little written history since the only manuscript we had on a leather scroll was kept unguarded and stolen away." Now there's a story behind this. The story is that the Mizos had a script which was stolen away. Similarly, Khasis also have a folk narrative where Khasi had to swallow the script given by God due to flood. So they internalized the knowledge given by God, and it became a part of their oral self. So similar writings are, similar assertions are coming up. Now, in this poem of Mamandai, titled Deification of Nature, also, she reclaims the ethnic faith, that how people believed in rocks, in trees, having life. Now, one interesting thing I want to point out here is that among the ethnic Nagas, there's a belief that human beings are born out of stones, and once they die, they will become another object in nature, like a hawk or a bird or a bee. So in that way, what happens, the entire narrative about the existential self is within the earth only. It is nothing of a metaphysical origin. The ontological quest or whatever you say, it is all what is there in the surroundings. Therefore, the environment is important, and each object is seen to have a spirit. And that is very interesting. Even Mamang Dai also claims that the river is a spirit. So in that way, this ethnic faith is keeping to peep in the writings, in English writing also. Uh, Now in that way, although there is a rejection of the colonial representation, we also see there is, in some extent, a residue of coloniality still continuing in some writings. Now, I have given an example of Nini Nungala's poem titled Dust, where she looks at a gunned down man and she talks about, she brings in the tropes, example or allusion of Cain from the Bible, which shows that how the residue of coloniality is still prominent in their writing. Now, in another poem of Malsomi Jacob, titled Narcissa and Narcissus Mirror, there's another poem titled Narcissa Does Not Know Her Mirror is Crooked. Now, you can see that this is a recreation of the Greek myth. Now, this is also a result of the colonial forces where the global scenario is open in front of the local people here. And I find it quite similar to the influence which Tarudat and Arudat had from the, I mean, how they were influenced by the French writing. It reminds me of that, that a poet from a remote corner of Mizoram or Arunachal is thinking about a folk narrative of some other country, which is not remotely connected also. So in that way, global forces are also coming in the post-colonial situation. And along with the local folktales, the global folktales are also coming in writing. Now, critique of the modern condition is very prominent in the post-colonial writings, and poetry from this region also are not an exception from that. Now, Demsula Au has written one poem which is called Night of the Full Moon. Here, she recreates the story where the tiger is the king, and people start demanding that we don't want the king anymore, we want democracy. Therefore, the tiger declares an election, and by force, and by manipulation he wins. And then he says that each of the animals should bring a gift to the tiger on the night of the full moon as a primal custom, okay, so that he can still claim ownership over the land and the traditional gifts from the other animals. Now here, as democracy has become an exercise in namesake in our political power structure, uh, it's a critic of that kind of condition, and sarcastically, the tiger claims that we a person remains him. So it's full of fun. It's full of it's a polysemic couplet. You can say there's a lot of meanings that can be attached to it. So nonetheless, I have to come back to the concept of the global into the local, or the glocal in Northeast writing. So we have writers like Ethiraj, who is staying somewhere in Australia and writing about hard people in Northeast. We have seen Mamang Dai, who was working in the forest services. She was an IAFS. And in the recent time, we have young poets like Gertrude Lamare, who is in UK, and they are all sitting in the so-called Western centers and writing, looking back at their local centers here. And they're also writing about the global issues, and many of them have got influenced by the global or the recent concepts of issues like feminism or ecological concerns, and therefore they're rereading the local locations of culture in the light of what they have and what they are encountering in the outer world. Now, Debsola Au has written one poem on headhunting, where through a voice of a woman, she's critiquing the age-old practice of headhunting or head-taking, which is considered to be heroic. So Nagas, many of the Nagas are identified as headhunters, which is a custom which was much respected earlier, but now with the advent of Christianity, it is no more practiced. So in that way, what is happening? From their socio-temporal locations, these writers are creating new spaces for interrogation and for interpretation and reinterpretation. Now, in that way, these poets are also expressing a sort of global aspiration. In fact, the choice of English itself is a sign of global aspiration. And this global aspiration, if you as a residue of colonial experience, it makes sense, but at the same time, it is also a resistance to coloniality. Now, in that way, we can call this literature as a part of Commonwealth literature, global literature, world literature, and we also can see that through writing, this region, through English writing, this region has become a part of the global world also. And now, many of you are familiar with God of Small Things. Now, Arundhati Roy, who was born in Shillong, she has also written something about her experience in Shillong in that book, in her writings also. So in that way, we are also becoming part of the global readership through English writing. Now, this quotation, which is there on your screen, Patke has talked about post-colonial poetry, that it displays three kinds of synergy, like between assimilation and resistance to colonial culture, between being shaped by and giving new shape to the colonial language, between and the will to modernity in an era of synchronous decolonization. Now, in that way, from that angle, we can see that Northeast English writing is writing back to the imperial center. It is displaying a regional consciousness, and it is also challenging course of even of because when we look at this kind of writing, we are willingly we have to resort to even the pre-colonial conditions, which is available in the cultural belief in the world view. So in that it is also challenging the discourse or the postulates of even post-colonialism. So in that way, we can consider Northeast English writing as polyphonic. And this is full of a lot of energy. Obviously, when you read them, you can know a lot about us. So I invite you to read more of Northeast poetry, more of Northeast English poetry. And if required, you can always communicate with me. So I would like to end the talk here. In case you have any question, it is always welcome. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
The floor is now thrown open for any observations and queries. Ma'am, I think there's one query. Someone has wanted to ask how they can get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you so much. I have just posted it in the inbox, in the chat box, my email ID. So please get in touch in case you want to. If you can see my some of the arguments I have already published in my book. You can have a look at these two books. This is Indian Narrative Traditions and then Narrative Cultures of Northeast India. These are the two edited volumes that I have. So if you want to have a look at my writing, you can consult these two books. And if you want my writings, I can also email to you. But more than that, I think if you have an introduction, then I'll appreciate that.
Anybody has any questions?
Ma'am, can we ask out loud, like, should it be posted in the chat box?
Yes, you can. No, you can. You can ask.
All right.
Just
Thank you,
introduce
ma'am.
yourself and then you can ask the question.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, good morning. My name is Subhashini. Ma'am, I wanted to ask something. When you said that post-colonialism is something that is not anti-colonial, but rather about decolonizing the mind and the spaces for ourselves. There's this recent trend that is happening among the Indic writers. They kind of search for this past, which is of a civilization that was beyond the control of colonization, and in doing so, there is a clear shift towards there is a clear shift where they tend to look at all ideas, all modern ideas, as something that is evangelical or colonial by nature. So how do we strike a balance and understand that there are certain ideas, for example, feminism, which are indeed something that is homegrown, something that is important for our consciousness, because after all, we are a democracy.
You are trying to understand what is, how do we have a balance?
Yes, ma'am, because not everything that comes from the modern idea is completely colonial, right? Of course, there is also certain ideas which are essential for a democracy. For example, something as diverse as us. For example, secularism and feminism, which are very important parts of our culture. So, how exactly do we strike a balance and not see it as a colonial aftermath?
I think I'd go to Gandhi first to explain what is happening. Gandhi had said that we can still be ruled by the English without the Englishman. So anything that forces you to be non-human, anything that treats you as an object uh, that can be colonized, or somebody who can impose certain things on you, if somebody is trying to occupy your space, physical or mental, that itself is colonization. Now, from the decolonialist angle, we don't see colonization only as colonization which was done by the British or by the Spanish. Even now, in my own house also, I can be colonized. If somebody is trying to occupy my mind or trying to condition my mind with false consciousness. Now, what is happening? Our political spaces are occupying our epistemic spaces also, our knowledge spaces also to a great extent. Now, the problem here is that we cannot go back to the past. We can only think of our future. Now, the future also has to build on what has happened in the past. Now, certain things which were good in the past, we can accept it. But certain things which were not good in the past, we have to discard it. And this is what we have done in the post-colonial condition also, like caste system. It is punishable. But so what is happening in the legal system? Unfortunately, certain things are not happening in the society itself. So that is why we as learned community, we have greater responsibility on us to rationalize things. It is not that I'll impose this is what is right for you, therefore you accept it. This is what is wrong for you, therefore you reject it. I don't have any right to say it. I have only right to explain it in front of you, to see you my reasons, and that is upon you to find out what actually is suitable for you, acceptable for you. So that is not happening. So therefore, we have to create spaces. We have to create our own circles where we can understand things. Now, obviously, see, the way false consciousness is spread, that is dangerous for human beings only. And we have responsibilities to resist it. It's not that we can be all the time politically correct, but there are still ways. And one way is to have more dialogue.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any question about Northeast itself? If you have any
Ma'am,
query, yeah,
can I
please.
have a word? Uh, Actually, I want to know if there is only only this thing called colonization in terms of English language that you already talked about. But I would like to know is it only language or English thought that you could find in literature, Northeastern literature? Is it only English language or English thought?
Thank you, sir. When I spoke about colonization of mind or consciousness, obviously it is not just the language, but language, if you look at language as a reflection of our mind also, you can see that English language has brought in lot of colonial concepts in our mind also. Now, I had given you one example when I was talking about residue of the colonial, that how the biblical illusions are penetrating in our ethnic writing also. When we are writing about our ethnic self, we are also giving illusions to the Bible. But to give you one more example, in one writing about the origin of the classes, it is said that in the beginning there was the word. In the beginning there was so, in the beginning there was a word which is coming from the biblical understanding of Genesis, that there was the word said, let there be light, and there was light. Now many people have rejected this idea of the yes. this is interest my English. Okay. This story that interpreting their own word is found only in one version of the original text, but not in the many other versions. There are 7 versions. So in that way, you can see how words are also coming in. Now, as we are talking about communism, even using the word itself is coming from the West. We are using it to we are going through here in Northeast or in other parts of the world. I guess it answered your query, sir.
Any other queries? Please mute your audio if you're having a conversation amongst yourselves. Please mute your audio.
Somebody has written now in the chat box. She used to know tabula rasa. Poem, Narcissus Mirror. So these are the yes. Sir Solomon, I
Okay, so can we wind up if there are no more questions? Thank you, Dr. Ara, for that comprehensive and informative presentation on post-colonialism as a means of rediscovering or rewriting self, and how the experience of colonialism in Northeast is different from the other parts of the world. Your views on Northeast post-colonial literature and poetry in particular throws light on how colonial history is recorded by the poets, representing the residue of colonial experience. Thank you once again, ma'am, for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us.
Thank you. Leave the meeting now.
The feedback link has been shared. So participants kindly fill in the forms. And ma'am, some of the feedback that we got via the YouTube live chat is that it was very informative, and they've actually felt that your presentation was really good. And it has been a very insightful session, and never heard much of the Northeast literature. I think after your talk, they are very much interested into looking kind of into looking into more of it. And overall, they felt like it was very well explained and very detailed. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Please send me the YouTube link through email.
Yes, ma'am. We'll do that. We'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Please join the Gmeet, the same link, tomorrow at 11. Thank you.
I'll take leave from you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
We can meet again later on. Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day, ma'am.